Mira Reyes wasn't used to feeling out of place. Back on Earth, at her old high school, she was the girl everyone knew, the champion kickboxer, the undefeated athlete. But as her shuttle docked at Galactic High, her hands clenched tightly on the straps of her backpack. The sight before her was overwhelming, an enormous floating campus suspended in the icy rings of a distant gas giant, glowing faintly under an alien sun. It looked more like a city than a school, with sleek, towering structures, floating walkways, and silvery orbs hovering like sentries around the perimeter. This was her new home, a far cry from the concrete walls and gym bleachers back on Earth. When Mira finally stepped into the main atrium, she was hit with a dizzying wave of colors, sounds, and smells unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Students of every imaginable shape, size, and species filled the space. Some had vibrant scales that glimmered in the light, others drifted past on gliding appendages, and a few seemed to blink in and out of sight entirely. The air was thick with a mix of foreign spices, electric energy, and a faint, metallic tang that Mira couldn't quite place. She tugged at her uniform, a plain navy suit that felt way too simple next to the elaborate outfits around her. Some students were dressed in armored plating, others wore shimmering holographic wraps, and a few seemed to wear nothing at all, their bodies pulsing with patterns like moving tattoos. "Newbie, huh?" came a voice from beside her. Mira turned to see a tall, willowy creature with translucent skin and eyes like liquid silver. She wasn't sure where to look, as the alien's features seemed to ripple and shift as it spoke. "Yeah," she said, managing a half-smile. "First day." "Well, good luck," the creature said with a smirk. "You're gonna need it." Mira didn't have time to respond before the creature drifted away, merging seamlessly into the crowd. She took a deep breath and looked at the holomap on her wrist display. Her first class, Advanced Xenophysical Training. She'd requested a physical skills class, hoping it would be similar to the martial arts courses she'd taken on Earth. If there was one thing she knew, it was how to fight. How hard could it be? The Xenophysical Training Gym was a massive, multi-level arena with holographic barriers and hovering platforms for combat practice. As Mira stepped inside, she was met with the skeptical glances of her classmates. They were a formidable group. Some looked built for combat, with thick hides, rows of sharp teeth, and muscular bodies. Others had slim, elongated limbs, perfect for agile movement. There was no doubt that every student here had some kind of advantage over her. She felt the weight of their stares, each one sizing her up. Before she could get her bearings, the instructor, a burly, grizzled alien with tough, mottled skin and 4 arms, clapped his hands and barked, "All right, recruits. Today, we're focusing on reflexes and agility. Pair up." Myra's heart skipped. She scanned the room, hoping to find someone who didn't look like they could crush her with one blow. Just as she was about to approach a smaller, insectoid alien, a shadow loomed over her. She turned around and came face to face, or rather, face to chest, with an enormous reptilian creature, easily twice her size. He had sharp, gleaming scales, a massive build, and piercing yellow eyes that seemed to pin her in place. "I'm Jaxer," he growled, a faint hiss in his voice. "Zorvian champion, undefeated in this class. So you're the new Earther, huh?" "Mira," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her, even if he did look like he could crush her in one swipe. "And yeah, I guess I am." Jaxer's eyes narrowed, and a smirk crept onto his scaly face. "Humans are soft," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "We don't get many of your kind in advanced training. Maybe they put you in the wrong class?" Mira felt a surge of annoyance, but kept her cool. She had worked too hard to let anyone doubt her abilities now. "I can handle myself," she replied, her voice calm. "Why don't you see for yourself?" Jaxer's smirk widened. "Fine. Let's see what the Earther can do." He shifted into a fighting stance, his massive fists raised. Mira mirrored him, keeping her stance light and ready, the way she'd been trained back home. She took a deep breath, centering herself. This was no different than a sparring match on Earth, just with someone twice her size and alien to boot. The instructor called out, "Begin." Jaxer lunged at her, his movements surprisingly fast for someone his size. Mira dodged, ducking under his arm as his fist shot past her. She could feel the air whip around her, and she realized he wasn't holding back. Her instincts took over, her body moving on autopilot as she dodged, sidestepped, and blocked. Years of training kicked in, and despite her fear, Mira felt a thrill rise in her chest. This was what she knew best: fighting. Jaxer growled in frustration, clearly unused to an opponent who could evade him. He threw another punch, and Mira ducked, then spun around, landing a quick jab to his ribs. It was barely a tap against his tough scales, but it was enough to throw him off balance. Jaxer's eyes widened in surprise, and Mira caught the flicker of respect that crossed his face. The other students had started to gather, watching in silence as Mira held her ground. She could feel the weight of their eyes, the curiosity mixed with surprise. Her heart pounded, but she kept her focus, reading Jaxer's movements. He was strong, but he was also predictable. His attacks were straightforward, all power and no finesse. She could use that against him. With a growl, Jaxer swung his arm wide, aiming for her head. Mira ducked low, then countered with a swift kick to his knee. He stumbled, and Mira seized the opportunity, twisting around to land a final punch square on his chest. Jaxer staggered back, eyes blazing with fury and grudging admiration. A low murmur ran through the crowd. The instructor watched with raised eyebrows, clearly impressed. Jaxer, panting slightly, looked down at her with a newfound respect. "Not bad for a human," he muttered, rubbing his chest. "Not bad for a Zorvian," Mira replied, flashing him a small, confident smile. As the crowd dispersed, Mira felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. She'd passed her first test. The alien world of Galactic High was daunting, but she was starting to think she could handle it. As she walked away from the training floor, Mira caught a few glances from other students, no longer filled with contempt or dismissal, but with curiosity and, perhaps, a hint of respect. Galactic High was intimidating, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't about to back down. By the next day, Mira was already the talk of Galactic High. Whispers followed her through the hallways, a blend of curiosity, skepticism, and outright disbelief. An Earthling had bested Jaxer in a combat exercise. Jaxer, the undefeated Zorvian. Mira wasn't entirely sure how she felt about the sudden attention, especially since it seemed like half the school thought she was either crazy or reckless. But she kept her head down, ignoring the stares and whispers as she navigated the maze-like hallways and towering holographic displays flashing announcements in alien languages. As she headed to her next class, her wrist device buzzed, flashing a message from the school's network. It was an invitation, or more accurately, a summons, to a place called the Krylock Training Hall after school. There was no sender name, just a short message: "Let's see if you're as tough as they say." Jaxer isn't the only champion here. Myra's jaw tightened as she read the message. She'd been in school for less than 48 hours, and already someone was calling her out. But despite the tension in her shoulders, she couldn't deny a thrill of excitement rising in her. Galactic High was full of the strongest fighters from across the galaxy, and she'd come here to test her limits. If her first day was anything to go by, she was already making waves. The rest of the day passed slowly, her thoughts drifting back to the challenge awaiting her. By the time her final class ended, Mira was more than ready. She made her way through the sprawling campus, guided by her wrist device's map to the Krylock Training Hall. When she arrived, she found herself standing before a sleek, dark structure with a glowing green door. The air around it pulsed with energy, and she could feel the faint hum of machinery beneath her feet. Inside, the training hall was packed. Word had spread fast, and it seemed like everyone was curious to see the human girl in action. Aliens of every shape and size crowded around the edges of a vast sparring arena, their eyes fixed on Mira as she stepped into the ring. Among them, she spotted Jaxer, his yellow eyes narrowed as he watched her. Clearly, he wasn't thrilled that she was getting this much attention. In the center of the ring stood an opponent, an alien named Gyrax, one of the campus top fighters from the planet Morza. Gyrax had 6 muscular arms, each ending in a fist the size of a cannonball. His body was covered in a thick, stone-like hide, and he looked every bit as formidable as the rumors had suggested. The crowd murmured excitedly as he stretched, each of his massive limbs flexing in preparation. "Are you ready, Earthling?" Gyrax's voice boomed, deep and guttural, as he stepped forward. His multiple eyes gleamed with a challenge, his lips curling in a mocking smile. "I hope you're tougher than you look. I'd hate to end this too quickly." Mira took a deep breath, centering herself. She'd faced arrogant opponents before, and she wasn't about to let his intimidation tactics shake her. "We'll see who ends it," she replied, her voice steady. She dropped into her stance, remembering her training. She wasn't about to fight him on his terms. She'd have to stay quick, agile, using every trick in her playbook to keep ahead of his powerful blows. The bell rang, and Gyrax wasted no time, launching himself forward with surprising speed. All 6 of his arms came down in a coordinated attack, a wall of fists aiming for her head and torso. Mira dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the blows as they struck the ground with a thunderous impact, leaving cracks in the arena floor. The crowd gasped as Mira darted to the side, rolling out of reach just as Gyrax swung again. She moved like a shadow, staying just out of his reach, making him chase her around the ring. Gyrax's frustration was palpable. He growled, throwing punch after punch, but Mira was faster, slipping through his defenses like water. Gyrax snarled, swinging his arms in a wide arc. Mira leapt back, narrowly avoiding the blow, but she could feel the force of his attack in the gust of air that whipped past her. She took a deep breath, her mind racing as she tried to think of a strategy. Gyrax was powerful, but he was also predictable. If she could just get him off balance. With a calculated step, she feigned a stumble, letting Gyrax think he had an opening. He lunged, all 6 arms outstretched to grab her. At the last second, Mira twisted out of his reach, sliding beneath him and delivering a powerful kick to his side. The impact was solid, and Gyrax let out a grunt as he staggered sideways. Mira didn't waste a moment. She moved quickly, keeping up the pressure, landing a series of swift, precise jabs to his exposed sides. Each blow seemed to surprise him, and the crowd watched in stunned silence as Mira held her ground, keeping Gyrax on the defensive. But Gyrax was tougher than she anticipated. With a roar, he whirled around, his arms sweeping through the air in a rapid series of strikes. Mira managed to dodge the first few, but one of his fists clipped her shoulder, sending her spinning backward. Pain shot through her arm, but she grit her teeth, refusing to show weakness. "You're fast, Earthling," Gyrax sneered, "but speed won't save you." Mira steadied herself, her mind racing. She was running out of time, and Gyrax wasn't giving her many openings. She'd have to try something risky. Her eyes darted around the arena, catching sight of a low ledge near the edge of the ring. It was a gamble, but it might be her best shot. She darted toward the ledge, and as Gyrax charged after her, she jumped up onto it, using the height to gain an advantage. With a burst of energy, she launched herself off the ledge, aiming a powerful kick at Gyrax's head. He tried to block, but she was faster, her foot connecting solidly with his jaw. Gyrax stumbled back, momentarily dazed. Mira landed gracefully, already back in her fighting stance, breathing hard but focused. The crowd erupted in cheers and gasps, and even Jaxer's eyes widened in surprise. Gyrax glared at her, but there was a flicker of something else in his gaze, something that looked a lot like respect. The bell rang, signaling the end of the match. Mira straightened, wincing slightly from the ache in her shoulder, but feeling a surge of satisfaction. She'd done it. Gyrax approached her, still catching his breath, and extended one of his massive arms. Mira hesitated for a moment, then took his hand, shaking it firmly. You're stronger than I expected, Earthling, he said, his voice grudging but respectful. Perhaps you're worthy of Galactic High after all. As she left the ring, the crowd parted, their gazes no longer filled with disdain but with admiration. Mira could feel the shift. She was no longer just a human girl. She'd earned her place here, and maybe, just maybe, she'd started to change how they saw her. As she walked out of the arena, Jaxer approached her, a smirk on his face. Not bad, he said, folding his arms. But don't get cocky, Mira. There are bigger challenges here than Gyrax. Mira met his gaze, a spark of defiance in her eyes. Bring them on, she replied, her voice steady. She'd come here to prove herself, and nothing and no one was going to stand in her way. In the shadows, another figure watched her, their gaze calculating. Word had spread quickly about the Earthling, and it seemed that Myra's journey at Galactic High was only just beginning. The echoes of Myra's victory over Gyrax hadn't faded from the halls of Galactic High before the next challenge came her way. This time, it wasn't delivered through a cryptic message or subtle taunts. Jaxer himself confronted her in the main atrium, his eyes glinting with a dangerous spark. So, you've taken down Gyrax, he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding students to hear. His sneer was unmistakable, as was the hint of bruised pride. But don't think that one lucky win makes you invincible, Earthling. You still have to face me. And this time, I won't hold back. The crowd stilled, hanging on to every word. Mira felt a chill run down her spine, but she stood her ground, keeping her gaze steady. Are you sure you want to risk it, Jaxer? She asked, her voice cool. She could feel the weight of the students' eyes on her, a mix of curiosity and anticipation. Jaxer's lip curled. Today. After school. The combat arena. We'll see if you can handle a real fight. Without waiting for her response, he turned and strode away, his heavy footsteps echoing through the atrium. The murmurs began as soon as he was out of earshot, whispers of excitement and skepticism rippling through the crowd. Myra's stomach twisted with a mix of nerves and exhilaration. This was more than just a fight, it was a test of her place here, a challenge from someone who saw her as a threat to his reputation. But she didn't come to Galactic High to back down, and she certainly wasn't going to start now. That afternoon, the combat arena was packed to the brim. The arena itself was a vast, domed structure, its transparent ceiling showing the stars twinkling in the distant expanse of space. The air was thick with anticipation, buzzing with energy from students who'd gathered to witness the showdown. Myra's reputation had already begun to grow, and now, as she stepped into the arena, she could feel the weight of that expectation settling on her shoulders. Across from her stood Jaxer, his tall, muscular frame tense and ready, his yellow eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her pulse race. He wore the Zorvian combat gear, a shimmering material that glowed faintly as he activated it. Mira had seen it before. It could absorb impact and even deliver electric shocks to anyone who got too close. Mira took a deep breath, centering herself as she adjusted her stance. She was wearing the standard protective gear, but she knew it would do little against Jaxer's raw power. Her strength wasn't in brute force, it was in speed, strategy, and the ability to read her opponent. She'd have to stay one step ahead if she wanted to stand a chance. The instructor raised his arm, signaling the start of the duel, and the arena fell silent. Begin. Jaxer lunged, moving faster than Mira had anticipated. His first punch was a blur, aimed straight at her head. She barely had time to duck, feeling the rush of air as his fist whizzed past her. Without missing a beat, he followed up with a swift kick that forced her to backpedal, struggling to stay out of his reach. His attacks were relentless, each blow stronger and more precise than she'd expected. But Mira wasn't about to be overwhelmed. She dodged and weaved, her movements fluid and quick, keeping just out of reach. She could sense Jaxer's frustration growing as his attacks continued to miss. He was powerful, but he was also predictable. His strikes were full of force but lacked the finesse and agility that Mira had honed through years of martial arts training on Earth. "Stand still and fight," Jaxer roared, his voice echoing through the arena. Mira smirked, using his frustration to her advantage. "I thought you said you were a champion, Jaxer. I expected more." Her words struck a nerve, and she could see his eyes narrow in anger. He came at her again, faster this time, his fists swinging in a brutal series of strikes. Mira ducked and spun, letting his own momentum work against him. Then, she saw her opening. As Jaxer threw a heavy punch, Mira sidestepped and swept her leg around, delivering a low kick to his knee. It was a calculated move, aimed to throw him off balance, and it worked. He stumbled forward, his eyes widening in surprise as he fought to regain his footing. Mira didn't hesitate. She followed up with a swift jab to his side, putting all her weight into the blow. Jaxer grunted, his face twisted in shock and fury. She could tell he hadn't expected her to fight back with such precision. With a growl, he activated the electrical currents in his suit, and Mira felt a jolt of warning as the air crackled around him. If she got too close, she'd be shocked badly. Thinking fast, Mira changed her strategy. She knew she couldn't rely on close contact anymore. Instead, she began circling him, staying light on her feet, forcing him to chase her around the ring. Jaxer's frustration was palpable as he tried to close the distance, but each time, Mira slipped out of reach, landing quick, calculated jabs whenever she could. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their eyes wide as Mira continued to evade Jaxer's attacks. She could feel her stamina waning, her muscles aching with the effort, but she pushed through, refusing to let him get the upper hand. Finally, Jaxer made a critical mistake. In his desperation to land a hit, he overextended, throwing a wild punch that left him open. Mira seized the moment. She sprang forward, leaping onto a nearby platform to gain height, then launched herself toward him, landing a powerful kick to his chest. The impact sent him sprawling backward, crashing into the arena floor with a heavy thud. Jaxer lay there, dazed, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. Mira straightened, panting but victorious, her gaze steady as she looked down at him. The arena was silent for a beat, and then the crowd erupted, cheers and gasps filling the air as they processed what they'd just witnessed. Mira had not only held her own against Jaxer, she'd won. Jaxer sat up, his face flushed with a mix of anger and grudging respect. He pushed himself to his feet, dusting off his combat suit as he approached her. For a moment, Mira wondered if he was going to try something, but instead, he extended his hand. "You fight well," he said, his voice low but sincere. "For an Earther." Mira hesitated, then took his hand, shaking it firmly. "You're not too bad yourself," she replied, a hint of a smile on her face. As they left the arena, the crowd parted for them, students murmuring in awe and admiration. Mira could feel their eyes on her, no longer filled with skepticism but with newfound respect. She'd proven herself, not just to Jaxer, but to everyone watching. She was no longer just a human girl trying to survive in an alien world, she was a force to be reckoned with. That night, as she lay in bed, her body aching but her heart pounding with satisfaction, Mira felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't expected. She'd come to Galactic High to test her limits, to prove that humans could stand alongside the galaxy's best fighters. And now, with Jaxer's respect and the admiration of her classmates, she felt like she was finally starting to belong. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Galactic High was full of rivals, each one stronger than the last, and she had no doubt that her victory over Jaxer would draw more attention and more challenges. But as she closed her eyes, a fierce grin spread across her face. She was ready for whatever came next. In the weeks that followed her victory over Jaxer, Mira found herself at the center of attention at Galactic High. Her classmates no longer looked at her with curiosity or disdain. Now, they watched her with respect or, in some cases, thinly veiled envy. She'd proven herself, but with that victory came the weight of new expectations. The students here were competitive, and as Myra's reputation grew, so did the list of those who wanted to challenge her. One afternoon, as she was heading to her dorm after a grueling session in xenophysical training, Myra was stopped by a group of students she hadn't met before. They were an intimidating bunch, each one from a different planet, each with their own distinctive look, tall, armored, or shimmering with strange auras. Leading them was a tall, lean alien with elongated limbs and a face that looked like it was carved from stone. His skin glowed with faint symbols that shifted and pulsed as he spoke. "Human," he said, his voice smooth but cold, "I'm Xylox, and we've been observing you. Impressive that you managed to hold your own against Jaxer, but if you think that makes you invincible, you are sorely mistaken." Myra met his gaze, holding herself steady. She could feel the threat in his words, but she refused to let it intimidate her. "I'm just here to learn," she replied, her tone calm but firm. "If you want to challenge me, get in line." A few of Xylox's followers snickered, but Xylox's expression remained impassive. "Perhaps," he said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Or perhaps we could be allies. Galactic High can be a dangerous place, especially for an outsider. It might be wise to have some friends in high places." Myra raised an eyebrow. She wasn't naive. She knew an offer like this came with strings attached. "And what do you get out of this alliance?" she asked. Xylox's eyes gleamed. "Simple. Strength respects strength. I'm offering you a place among us, the strongest in the school. Together, we could ensure our place at the top. And in return, we could teach you things that even your Earth training couldn't begin to cover." Myra considered his words, her mind racing. She could see the allure of it, the chance to learn from some of the most powerful students in the galaxy, to have allies who could help her navigate the complexities of Galactic High. But something about Xylox's offer felt off, like he was testing her loyalty before she'd even accepted. Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Xylox, are you harassing my friend?" Myra turned to see Jaxer approaching, his imposing figure casting a shadow over the group. He gave Xylox a pointed look, his arms crossed over his chest. Xylox's smile faded, and he straightened, giving Jaxer a curt nod. "Not at all, Jaxer," Xylox replied smoothly. "Just offering some advice to our new classmate." Jaxer's eyes narrowed. "Funny. I didn't realize advice came with a threat attached." He looked at Myra, his expression serious. "Watch out for him," he said, lowering his voice. "Xylox doesn't make offers without a price." Xylox chuckled, raising his hands in a mock gesture of peace. "Come now, no need for hostility. It's just a friendly invitation." He turned to Myra, his gaze lingering for a moment before he inclined his head. "The offer stands, if you change your mind." With that, he and his group slipped away into the shadows, leaving Myra and Jaxer alone. Myra exhaled, tension leaving her shoulders. "Thanks for the save," she said, glancing at Jaxer. "I don't think he would have tried anything here, but still." Jaxer shrugged. "Xylox is more dangerous than he looks. He's got a network of followers and a reputation for getting what he wants. Be careful around him." "Duly noted," Myra replied. "Seems like I'm making enemies as fast as I'm making friends." Jaxer gave her a rare smile. "That's how it goes here. But you're not alone." He paused, glancing around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "There's a group of us who train together, some of the best fighters in the school. You should join us. It would be good to have you on our team." Myra's eyes widened. She hadn't expected an invitation from Jaxer, especially after their tense rivalry. "Really?" she asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. He nodded. "You've earned it. We could push you to your limits, teach you things that you won't learn in class. And besides," he added, smirking, "it's a good way to keep an eye on potential threats. Like Xylox." Myra considered his offer, then nodded. "All right. Count me in." The next morning, Mira met with Jaxer and his group in the advanced training hall. She recognized a few faces, some students who had watched her duel with Jaxer, others who had silently rooted for her during her fight with Gyrax. They were a diverse mix, each with unique abilities, and she could feel the intensity of their gazes as they sized her up. The training was unlike anything she'd experienced. They pushed her beyond her limits, teaching her techniques that relied on using energy fields, navigating low gravity, and predicting alien physiology. One day, they practiced combat in near-zero gravity, learning to maneuver in mid-air and use limited friction to their advantage. Another day, they focused on using different environmental elements as part of their strategy. One member of the group, a wiry creature named Lyra with skin that shimmered like a chameleon's, taught Mira how to cloak herself in shadows, blending into her surroundings almost invisibly. Another, a hulking alien named Tharn, showed her how to anticipate an opponent's moves by reading their muscle tension and body language, a skill that came naturally to his species. Mira soaked up every lesson, determined to make herself stronger and faster. Her skills grew rapidly, and she could feel herself adapting to her new environment, becoming more at home in the alien school. But as she trained, she could feel Xylox's eyes on her, always watching, calculating. He hadn't forgotten about his offer, and Mira knew that he was waiting for the right moment to remind her. She could sense his jealousy simmering, his frustration that she'd rejected his invitation. Finally, one day after training, Xylox approached her in the hallway. His expression was calm, but his eyes betrayed his irritation. "I see you've chosen Jaxer's side," he said, his voice laced with a hint of bitterness. "I wonder if that was the best decision." Mira met his gaze, refusing to let him intimidate her. "I chose the people who actually wanted to help me, not manipulate me." Xylox's smile was cold. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mira. Galactic High has rules, yes, but there are other ways to influence the outcome of a match. Ways that Jaxer's little group may not be able to protect you from." Mira didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of you, Xylox." He laughed softly. "Perhaps you should be." He leaned in close, his eyes narrowing. "Watch your back, Earthling. You may have won a few battles, but the war is far from over." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Mira standing alone in the hallway, his words echoing in her mind. The next day, as she prepared for another training session, Jaxer pulled her aside, his expression serious. "I heard about your encounter with Xylox. Be careful. He's not just posturing, he's been known to arrange accidents." Mira nodded, steeling herself. She'd come to Galactic High to prove herself, to show that she was worthy of standing among the galaxy's best. But now, she realized that her journey was about more than just proving herself. It was about survival, navigating the rivalries and alliances that defined this place. As she walked into the training hall, flanked by her new allies, Mira felt